thank you very much for coming to speak to us. It's such a pleasure to have you on this Business Worth and Mindset podcast. Yeah. How is the day so far? Busy?
The day's been busy. It's been a busy day so far, so it's been all good. Thanks, and thanks for having us on here. It's a pleasure to be here and here to serve and help and share what I can share with your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a lot of golden nuggets, seeing all the bits that you've done. So we thought it'll be good to get to share your thoughts, your business, and your journey as well with our listeners. Who get inspired to believe that it's also possible for them, and some can probably follow you and engage with your journey and what you provide as well for property investors. So it should be good. So I thought probably to begin with, if you can just to give us a bit of context and background of your journey as well up to where you are now, which some our listeners tend to sort of relate to that kind of journey for our guests, so they can get to appreciate your background and see how that relates to themselves in a way that they feel if Akhtar can get to this particular stage with his story, maybe there's also hope for us as well. So it would be good to if you can take us through your beginnings and up to here. Yeah,
absolutely. I'd be more than delighted to do that. So my kind of beginnings of entrepreneurship started when I was very young. I was 18 years of age. I moved out of home very young, and I moved into an apartment. And after I was in there for a couple of days, I got a call from the letting agent saying the landlord was going to come round and collect his letters. So one evening there was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and there was a young guy standing there with like a baseball cap on, puffer jacket. So bear in mind, this is early 90s, 1992. And he said, "Hey, I've come to collect the mail." And I said, "Oh, you must be the landlord's son." He said, "No, I'm Andy, your landlord." And I remember thinking, you've got to be flipping kidding me, because this guy was about my age. And I remember thinking at the time, it was a really difficult thing for me to, move out of home. It took me like 6 months to save up money for furniture and rent in advance and deposits and all that stuff. And I remember thinking, it was a big deal for me to move out of home at 18. I remember then thinking, like, how on earth is this kid who's the same age as me managed to buy a property? And I actually became very, very good friends with Andy, my landlord. And I found out that he went to, he inherited some money from a relative passing away, which was about £10,000. He then went and borrowed another £10,000 from a family member, and he bought this flat, which was in South London, from auction. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't know you could do that. But he then went and refinanced the flat for 25 grand and got all of his money back out of the deal. And I remember thinking, wow, this is flipping amazing, right? Wow. So he bought this deal, which in essence was a no money left in deal. But I then found out he repeated this process 5 times and bought 5 properties. So the only reason he stopped is because he couldn't get any more mortgages, and back then there were no buy-to-let mortgages. So this totally inspired me. I remember thinking, wow, like, I'm going to become a landlord. I'm going to become a buy-to-let investor. But it took me 10 years to buy my first property. So people say, well, why did it take you so long? What was, why? And the truth be known is, people also say, why did you move out of home so young? Well, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family unit. My parents were immigrants. They came over here. It was a very difficult time for them. And my parents split when I was about 5 years of age. But for about 10 years, they had this, love-hate relationship. They were kind of fighting with each other. They were dragging us through custody battles. We were in and out of court. And then when I got to the age of 15, they had this huge fight. And it really, it dragged me, my younger siblings, all in and out of court. And it kind of tore the family apart. So my parents were having a great fight, but they couldn't see the damage that they were doing. And when you grow up in a family dynamic like that, that's dysfunctional, you end up as a child or as a young teenager or as a young adult, end up having wounds from it. You end up getting hurt. It creates trauma. It creates limiting beliefs in yourself. It can create a lot of damage to one's mindset. So the challenge for me was, by the time I got to the age of 15 and my parents dragged us through this really bitter custody battle, I went off the rails. I didn't quite know how to handle what was going on. I didn't know how to handle my own emotions. My parents were guilt tripping us. They're doing all the kind of messy things that sometimes goes on when you got a couple going through a divorce. And I just kind of went off the rails. That was the bottom line. I went off the rails. I just didn't pay attention to school. I went to a grammar school, so I was a pretty smart kid, but I just couldn't handle what was going on a personal level. So I was trying to escape from pain. I just didn't understand it at the time. I was trying to escape from all the challenges that were going on. I started dropping out of school. I started hanging out with all the dropouts. I started partying. I started smoking weed and drinking and like messing around with girls, because all that stuff was pleasure-seeking activities. It made me feel better than dealing with the reality of what my life was like. Yeah. And, I got kicked out of school because I just wasn't turning up, and I left school with no qualifications. I couldn't really get a job. I had no proper skill set. So I flitted from crap job to crap job to crap job. I worked as a waiter in a restaurant. I zipped around on a moped delivering pizzas for Domino's at the time. I stacked shelves in Sainsbury's, and I was flitting around trying to do these jobs. So back then for me, life was pretty crap. It was a real crap time for me. I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't have those prospects. All my good friends went off to uni and were kind of progressing themselves in terms of a career. And I kind of felt like the odd one out. I kind of felt like I wasn't good enough. I'd failed at life. And I didn't really know how to understand my emotions or my mindset. So I kind of plodded along for a little while. But the highlight of my life back then was partying. So I was one of these people that used to work all week, then I'd go out partying at the weekends. Yeah, that was kind of my thing. So again, we're going back to the early 90s. This was the beginning of the whole rave scene. So I used to go out to kind of clubs and bars and, raves and be in fields and all that sort of stuff. And it was all great fun. It was a great escape from the reality of the crappy life that I was living. But the only problem about being part of that rave scene is that recreational drugs were part of everyday life. So people were smoking cannabis. Ecstasy was the drug at the time. And before I knew it, I started using ecstasy. And it was all great until one day I nearly OD'd. And it was at that point I realized, I nearly died, from taking ecstasy. It was just, I took the wrong tablet, wrong time and everything else. And that was a wake-up call for me, because it was at that point I thought, you know what, like, life is too short. I have to make a big change. I can't hang around with the dropouts and these party people that I'm hanging around with. I need to step up, And it was at that point I knew I had to make a tough decision to leave that peer group behind, leave that circle of people behind, and do something different. It was at that point my mind went back to like when I met Andy, the landlord, and I thought, you know what, now's the time for me to get involved in property. So I made a big decision to cut those people out. I moved areas and I started to rebuild my life. And this was quite a tough time. It was a very lonely time because I left a group of friends that I was around with, but these people weren't good for me. So it was at that point that I started to take life seriously. I started to kind of buckle up, so to speak. I kind of leveled my game up, and I ended up working. I was a breakdown recovery driver for the AA. So I used to be like all around Southeast London, attending these breakdowns. I was working long hours, 12, 15-hour days sometimes, but I got the deposit together for my first property. So I bought my first property and got on the ladder, and I actually felt like I was starting to achieve something. Yeah. But also at this time, I started to get involved in personal development, because one of the things that I saw that was a big distinction between people who are successful and people who weren't successful is that people who are successful had a different mindset. They thought differently, and they had thoughts that generated different behaviors. And I thought, you know what, I need to learn this stuff. Yeah. And I was also aware that I was very limited in my own thinking. Sometimes I had negative thoughts, sometimes like I was challenged. And when I look back and think, well, why did it take me 10 years to do my first property deal? It's because my belief system, I had limiting beliefs, I had beliefs around my self-worth. Perhaps this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not good enough. What if I get it wrong and I screw up? I'm going to look stupid. What if I make a costly mistake? I'd procrastinate, every time I go to do something and then it was a little bit difficult or tricky, I'd procrastinate and distract myself. I'd have that negative self-doubt and that talking, that kind of negative self-talk in my mind. My confidence wasn't there to do stuff. And all of this was a direct impact of my upbringing. So when I eventually did do that first deal, I started to learn and study some personal development and started to change my thinking. It was also at this point I did my first deal, I started to train in psychology. So I learned about neuro-linguistic programming. I started to study psychology. I trained as a clinical hypnotherapist. I studied psychotherapy. And a big part of this personal development journey for me was upgrading my own mindset. It was fixing the stuff that was holding me back, because I knew that for me to be the best version of myself, I simply had to think differently. I had to have a different belief system, because one of the things I learned very early on is you'll only get as far as your belief system will allow you. I think there's a saying from Henry Ford, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right. So if we've got these limiting beliefs that we've got in the back of our mind, which are mostly unconscious, And a lot of these beliefs can come from traumatic experiences or painful experiences we've had in the past. They're stuck there in the operating system of your mind, and they'll limit what you do. So it was about this time that I started to get involved in property and personal development. And what I found was, as I kind of grew in terms of my awareness, my understanding of my mindset and psychology, so did my wealth, you know. So it took me a little while to buy some more property. It took me 8 years to buy 3 more properties. And people say, well, why did it take you so long? Again, it's the same thing. I was doing things the very old fashioned vanilla way. I was saving up for deposits. You know, I was waiting to refinance. You know, I was waiting on the market to rise. But also I'd taken a shift in career. So at this point, I became a coach. I became a life coach first off. I then went into some management development and some management consultancy. I started working with some blue chip companies and started coaching executives. I found I was very good at coaching people. So I started to make good money from my coaching business. And it got to about 2000 and I think we got to about 2006, where I did my very first commercial conversion. Everything was great back then. If you go back to the last credit crunch, you know, money was abundant, right? You could go and do self-cert mortgages. You can go get as many credit cards as you want. Like, money was just thrown at you. So we was about 6 weeks away from completing this commercial project. It was a shop with upper parts. We converted the upper parts into flats. And I got a call from the commercial manager saying, hey, look, we're going to have to pull your funding. And I was like, oh, why is that then? And they said, well, because the money markets are changing. And at the time I was blasé. I was like, we'll just go somewhere else and get another mortgage. After I finished the project, 6 weeks later, everyone was queuing up to get their money out of Northern Rock. And we was literally in the beginning of the credit crunch. So, you know, things became really tough. You know, I had my first child on the way. You know, I had a little bit of money and I moved from London down to Kent. And I struggled for a little while because money was abundant. Also, my coaching business started to take like a hit because we had corporate companies that weren't investing in their staff and everything else. And it was at that point I thought, look, I've got to step up here. What do I do? And I knew that the only way I was going to really make more money was through property. But it was very difficult. I couldn't raise money in the same way. We couldn't go get mortgages the same way. And it was at this point, like, through persistence and tenacity, I thought there's got to be a way of me being able to buy property with little to no money. That led me down this kind of rabbit hole, and I discovered this whole concept of below market value deals. And I was like, wow, how does this work? No money down finance. Wow, how does all this stuff work? And then for a couple of years, I educated myself and I started to learn about BMV deals, lease options, all these kind of creative contracts, but I still wasn't really doing anything. And then something happened in 2010, which was a real game changer for me. A very close friend of mine passed away, and it was really, really sudden. It was just out of the blue. And she left behind, you know, a loving husband and 3 young kids. And the devastation that I saw was just harrowing. It was really heartbreaking. And when you see someone die so young and totally unexpected, it kind of makes you put your life under the microscope. You start to put things into perspective. You start to question your mortality. And when I saw what the kids went through, what her kids went through, it was heartbreaking. And it made me look at myself and my family. And I remember thinking at the time, what would happen to my partner and my child if anything happened to me? Like, you know, would she be able to cope? But actually it was the wrong question. It's how badly would she struggle? And it also brought up a lot of pain from my childhood, you know, seeing these kids like lose a mother, lose a parent. That was heartbreaking. And then me seeing that could be a possibility. That could be something that happened to my family. Brought a lot of pain up in it, you know, brought a lot of pain up, but that pain then motivated me to move forwards. And I thought, you know what? You know, I'm piddling around with life, right? I've got these opportunities here and I'm not taking enough action. I was too comfortable doing what I was doing. I was working a job at the time. I was commuting backwards and forwards from Kent to London. I was running an estate agency. I was selling my time for money, but it was exhausting. You know, I was leaving home in the morning. I wasn't seeing my kids. If I got back in time, my kids were just going to bed. At the weekends, like, I was exhausted. You know, my partner was, you know, we had 2 kids in the end. My partner was looking after 2 kids. It was a struggle, you know, and we just got used to that way of life. And it was this experience that made me think, you know what, we've got to do more. I've got to do more, because I felt like I hadn't achieved enough as a man. And I kind of felt like I was failing as a father and a husband. So that kind of strapped a rocket up my backside. And I decided I've got to go and learn how to do property properly. I then joined a mastermind. I worked with a couple of really good mentors, and strapped with, you know, a bit of pain behind me that was motivating me to go forwards. My understanding of property and also my understanding of mindset, I set out to build a portfolio. And within 12 months, I entered the better, your best of that mastermind. I had, I think there were 60 people on the mastermind. 7 had entered the end of year better, your best. Of the 7, I think 5 of them had bought 1 property each. 1 person had bought 2. I'd done 9 individual deals. I set up 2 letting agencies. I bought a portfolio of 12 properties from a distressed landlord, and I became financially free at that point. And yeah, it was pretty spectacular, but it was hard. I was incredibly focused. It was hard grind. I put the hours in, I put the sweat in, I was tenacious. I wasn't going to take no for an answer, because this almost felt to me like it was a life or death situation for my family. It was my big driver. So that's kind of where I got to, and I, became financially free. It was an amazing experience. I won an Audi Cabriolet off of as first prize for the mastermind. And the key thing here was, when I started this mastermind, I didn't have any money, right? I didn't have any money. I actually paid for the mastermind with 0% credit cards. Okay. And I had to trust in the process. I had to make it work. I knew that you could do these no money down deals. I knew you could get investors on board. I just didn't know how to do it, but I knew I must do it. It was a must. And whatever happened, I had to make it work. It was, failure wasn't an option for me. So I kind of stuck my neck out on the line. I took a big risk, but I knew I was going to go and do it. I just didn't know how much I was going to do. So that's where I got to, sort of 2011. And what happened after that, a lot of people were saying to me, well, how have you managed to do so much? What was the difference that made the difference with you? And the truth be known is, it was really down to the mindset. It was really down to the psychology, because as well as me learning all the property strategies and the ways to do deals, I had to upgrade my belief system. I had to do a lot of inner work. So as well as working with my property mentors, I was working with mindset coaches to remove the limiting beliefs that I had, the glitches in the operating system. I also worked with a business coach so I could treat property as a business. And those 3 things combined were what really helped me to kind of level up and grow. And when I explain that to people, people are like, wow, can you mentor me? Can you show me? Can you show me how to do it? So a year later, 2012, I was running my own masterminds. And the difference was, I wasn't just teaching people the property strategies and the business strategies. I was heavily teaching people the mindset, because one of the things that I discovered, and I've created a model around this, I call it the 4 phases of implementation. Whenever you take a strategy that's theory and you want to go and put it into practice, there's 4 phases people go through. And this is something that I went through. The first phase is what I call the euphoria phase, which is, hey, I'm going to go in this mastermind, I'm going to go in this workshop, I'm going to go do property. And you have these euphoric feelings. You feel good, you feel pumped. But the problem with that is, you sometimes get this false sense of achievement, like, just because I'm on this mastermind, or just because I've learned this strategy, you feel that your results are guaranteed. The problem that happens then is, you go to what I call the next phase, which is the epiphany phase, which is you go to put it into practice, and then you realize there's things that you don't know. How do I talk to a vendor? What do I say to the estate agent? How do I approach an investor to lend money to me? Like, what do I do? And of course, you have all these doubts. You don't know what to do. You have these gaps in your knowledge. And it's a difficult thing for us to do as human beings, because you see, when you are in your business or your career, you're top of your game. When you're learning something new, you're at the bottom of the learning curve, you're a newbie again, it doesn't feel good. So it's at that point people start to meet resistance. That's when fear kicks in, doubt kicks in, that negative self talk kicks in, That's where procrastination kicks in, fear kicks in, okay? Imposter syndrome. Oh, who am I to be doing this? I don't really know what I'm doing. What if I get called out? What if the estate agent realizes I don't know what I'm talking about? What if the vendor realizes I don't know what I'm talking about? All these fears and insecurities kick in. And the other thing that happens, and this is something that I did a lot in the early days, is you get shiny penny syndrome, which is when it becomes difficult, we distract ourselves and go and do the next thing that's going to be easier. So we was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do HMOs. Maybe I shouldn't do lease options. Perhaps I should do that strategy over there. And we distract ourselves because of the uncomfortable feelings. So this is the key thing that I learned myself. And then, I saw my students going through, they get to that resistance, and then they don't understand the psychology and what's going on emotionally and why they're distracting themselves. So you get people who go, hey, look, I want to quit my job. I want to do property. And then they come out to this point over here and they become uncomfortable because they get into that place where they feel that resistance. They're out their comfort zone. And then all of a sudden, from this perspective here, their job looks more attractive. So it's like, oh, maybe my job wasn't that bad. Maybe it was all right. Maybe it was comfortable. And they want to go back to what they know, which is their comfort zone. So the next stage is really what I call the evolution phase, which is where if you can understand the psychology, you break through. This is what I did, is breaking through those limiting beliefs, understanding what the fear is, overcoming all that resistance. And it's at that point you break through and you start to get some results. You start to get your first deal done. Oh, great. That then changes your mindset. It upgrades your belief system. It boosts your confidence. You start to get a little bit of momentum. Okay. But you need to keep progressing, because what will happen is at this stage, it's very easy to hit a plateau and go, I've done 2 or 3 deals, maybe I'm all right, and you stop growing. The next phase is what I call the the excellence phase, which is where you actually look at what you're doing and you evolve and you break through those plateaus. So that was what I understanding psychology. I put this model together because I realized I went through this, and this is what a lot of people go through, and this is what a lot of my students went through. So if I could share that model with people, they can then understand, it doesn't matter where you are as an entrepreneur, if you're completely new, or even if you're experienced, even if you're expert level, because I've mentored a lot of other property experts in this particular model, they then know how to break through and navigate. The problem that we have as entrepreneurs, especially in property and business, is we all want to look like we're smashing it. We all want to look like we're infallible. We all want to look like we're successful. And our egos don't like it when we're struggling or we've got a challenge or we've got a problem. We don't feel good about it. So sometimes people don't talk about this stuff. Sometimes people don't think it's okay to talk about this stuff. So one of the things that we do in our academy, in our mastermind group, is we create a very safe space. And I let people know that this is part of the journey. This is normal. Okay. It doesn't matter where you're at. Whenever you're leveling up your life and your business, you're going to go through this resistance. You're going to go through this psychologically and emotionally. And this is what you need to do to kind of get ahead in life. So that's kind of what I did. I taught that to my mastermind students, and we've been mentoring ever since. I've been mentoring for over a decade now. We do everything in terms of property, pretty much all the strategies. Just to give you an idea of some of the deals that I do, we just done a flip. It's a 2-bedroom assisted sale flip down in Sussex, quick bread and butter deal. We've also got a land deal that we're doing, which is we're looking to get planning for about 20 houses with a GDV of about 7.5 mil. And we do lots of commercial conversions as well in between. Over the last couple of years, we've just moved into mergers and acquisitions, which is buying businesses and buying distressed businesses. We're focusing and targeting businesses that own commercial property. So it's another strategy that we're employing. So that's kind of got me to where we're at right now. One of the things I should add here is that when I got to, I think it was about 2013, unfortunately, I split up with my ex-partner, but I was in a position where I had enough passive income coming in from my portfolio that I got joint custody of my kids, and I retired for about 4 years. So I was able to be a hands-on dad to my 2 daughters. I literally overnight swapped a briefcase that used to have property contracts in it for a nappy bag with Pampers and baby wipes in. My youngest daughter was about 1.5 years old, and I literally spent 4 years just raising my kids, just spending time with them, going to school with them, picking them up. And I kind of retired for that period of time. And I kind of got called back into property, and I started mentoring for some other people. Today, what we're doing, the kind of stuff we're doing right now, because of the current climate, I think we've got the best time and the best opportunity in this lifetime to be doing deals, because this is going to be the biggest recession since records began. And obviously, when there's recessions, there's distressed sellers, there's motivated sellers, there's more deals to have. So this is what we're doing, and this is what we're gearing up for with myself and my students. So that's kind of my journey. That's kind of what I went through. And this is where we got to right now.